Hello again, everyone. Mighty nice to see you. So glad you could stop by. This is Reverend Paul J. Bern with Progressive Christian Ministries, and I've got another commentary for the day to lay on you here. So, without any further ado, let me just go ahead and get started. This one is called Wealth or Jesus. We must pick one or the other. You want Jesus, you want money. Never mind all the business about, but Jesus can give me money. Jesus can make me rich. No, that's not the Bible. I'll explain some of that here in just a minute. Stick with me, okay? Because this is going to be worth your time, and I won't take a lot of it either. I'll be brief. The definition of cognitive dissonance is a person's brain trying to reconcile two contradicting realities. One common example of this is an abusive relationship, for instance, where the man or the woman obviously understands there's abuse coming from their significant other or their spouse, and yet they continue to love them anyway. Oftentimes what happens is that their brain will then develop excuses for such action. It's their fault, they will say, or the other person has just been under a lot of stress. The reality is their brain simply cannot accept two different realities that contradict, so it creates a third. This is never more prevalent than when it comes to wealthy conservatives and Christianity. They are the proponents of policies that contradict much of what Jesus taught, and I'm going to just get straight into this right now. These top 1% folks, and you know who you are, who are sitting on 99% of America's wealth, while the other 99% of the people squabble over the scraps. These folks allegedly do so in order for the rest of us to enjoy the windfall of their generosity through increases in top 1% revenue. Now, let that sink in for a second. And this is an economic policy that is based on this notion. If we subsidize greed even more than it already is, the rest of society benefits as a result. Now I ask you, when has greed ever benefited any society? And while we're at it, what does the Bible say about this greed that I'm talking about? In Ecclesiastes chapter 5 and verse 10, it says, "He that loves silver shall not be satisfied with silver, nor he that loves abundance with increase. This is also vanity." It becomes a driving obsession, in other words, to acquire still more. Once the acquiring has happened, then comes the need to protect what has been acquired. This is selfishness, and it is sin, as it is written. There was a man all alone. He had neither son nor brother. There was no end to his toil, yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. "For whom am I toiling?" he asked. "And why am I depriving myself of enjoyment?" This too is meaningless, a miserable business. That is from Ecclesiastes chapter 4 and verse 8. Same book, a little bit further towards the front. Once the greed-driven have acquired and secured everything in sight, of course, they're still not satisfied. They never are. They are never satisfied with all they have. Their eyes always search for more. as it is written. And then Jesus said to them, watch out! Be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for a man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. That was Luke chapter 12 and verse 15, by the way. This coveting begets more greed, which snowballs into more selfishness, and the selfishness begets more coveting, and so on, and to utter madness, to complete depravity. The sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eats little or much, but the abundance of a rich man permits him to sleep. Ecclesiastes chapter 5 and verse 12. By this point, there is no room left for God. Money is now the master of the house. As it is written, no one can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Matthew chapter 6, verse 24. Seems pretty straightforward to me. How about you? Greed is a vicious circle that feeds on itself, generating ever-increasing amounts of greed, of craving still more. The more they have, the more they want. Well, isn't that what we've seen in the United States for the last 40 years? Isn't this what trickle-down economics has given us? In the last 40 years, the top 1% has grown exponentially, never more so than in the last decade. Yet, what has it brought us, the remainder of the people? Economic failure caused by a cadre of millionaires crying out that they need even more. Many of the same businesses that proved in the 90s, even with higher taxes, that they could still yield historic growth, are now fighting a return to those very same tax levels. They now claim economic prosperity isn't obtainable at those job-destroying levels of taxation. That's their words, not mine. The fact is, they're right. Their economic prosperity cannot be sustained at a higher level of taxation. The more we fed into this myth of trickle-down economics that dates back to Ronald Reagan's presidential administrations, the more lower taxes benefited them, the more they expect to expand their greedy nature. To raise the 1%'s taxes would mean their giant profits would probably take it down to, well, just very significant profits. This isn't about these businesses making profits. They can easily do that, but they want larger profits, whether they're needed or not. What they had in the 1990s during a period of record economic growth sorry, is no longer good enough. They want more. Of course, it's impossible to return to the very same tax rates that brought us the best economic growth in our history, because then their greed would have to return to a lower level, as the Bible says. Greed is perpetual. It never ends. We give them more, and now their solution to fix our problems? Well, you guessed it, they want even more. Isn't that exactly what the Bible warns will happen? Didn't we not have wealthy Americans in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s? The answer is yes. They just weren't as wealthy. Trickle-down economics was the catalyst for the acceptance of greed. It gave those with the most even more when they didn't need it, And then any mention of returning it to the rightful owners is met with a horrific depictions of economic Armageddon. So there you have it. Cognitive dissonance. The top 1%'s political ideology completely contradicts the realities we've seen and those the Bible supports. They preach Christian values at the same time they advocate a policy that says giving into greed will benefit our society. They vehemently denounce abortion while advocating war and conquest, resulting in 1.2 million civilian deaths in Iraq and Afghanistan alone since 2001. So, unborn babies get a great deal of attention in churches, but once you're born, you're screwed, especially if you live in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Yemen, Somalia, Syria, etc., etc. The human brain simply can't handle two conflicting realities, so it creates one of its own. The more we allow the wealthy to have, the more they ask us to give. We did this to the detriment of our own economy and ourselves. We did this to ourselves, people. If trickle-down economics really works, shouldn't their success and our success mirror one another? As they gain, we gain. You know, like a rising tide lifts all boats. However, that isn't what happened because life no longer works that way, thanks to the 1%. The more the 1% gains, the more they want, and they've made sure that everybody chips in. Everybody else has to chip in. Think of a small fishing boat. If the weight is equally dispersed, it stays buoyant and afloat. But what if the weight shifts more forward or more backwards? What happens? Well, the boat becomes unstable. Now, imagine if suddenly all the weight in that boat is shifted to the very front. What would happen? Well, simple. The boat will suddenly suffer instability, capsize, and sink. Well, as our nation's wealth rushed to the top 1% in the last decade, that's exactly what happened. Our boat capsized and then sank. Does this contradiction between faith and political ideology suggest that conservatives believe that Jesus supported greed? It looks to me like they believe he condemned homosexuals and demeaned women and considered the poor as lazy people seeking a handout. So why not perpetuate the belief that he would have supported greed while they're at it, huh? Don't let the Bible scriptures sway your views. It's much easier to simply allow yourself to give into and concoct a delusional reality. What religious conservatives have done is a complete distortion of Christian faith. The so-called prosperity gospel, for instance, doesn't even fit into the very nature of what Jesus lived and died for. Every economic stance that prosperity gospel proponents support benefits the wealthy at the expense of the remaining 99% of us. People like me. Now, does it make any sense to have a portion of American society that pushes themselves as the Christian majority, the party of values and decency, and yet their entire economic stance contradicts what the Bible and Jesus says about greed? What religious conservatives claim to follow isn't Christianity at all, and it sure doesn't emulate Jesus. Remember what Jesus said about this very thing. For unto whomsoever much is given, of him shall be much required. Meaning Those who have the means to make a difference should be doing so unreservedly and unselfishly. And yet, to a religious conservative, this is essentially what they call socialism. It's allegedly unfair. But isn't Christianity about giving, loving, and helping those who cannot help themselves? These are the principles that I try best to live by as a practicing Christian. So why aren't the conservatives doing it? Why are they doing exactly the opposite? But since I am neither Republican nor Democrat, I'm neither liberal nor conservative because I think there are good points to both sides. On the one hand, I could be considered very conservative because I'm in favor of small government and free enterprise, private ownership. But I could also be considered quite liberal because I'm a firm believer in universal health care, free higher education, and a $14 an hour minimum wage. I've got books out about this stuff. Visit my book page on my website. I'll give you the address again at the end of this broadcast. We all know that the two-party U.S. political monopoly lacks faith and morals. They just don't have it. They envy the rich and all of that rhetoric that good Christian Republicans use against people, and yet none of it is true. None of it. Where they sit, it is a walking contradiction. A party who supports faith in God above everything and anything, and yet policies that favor greed over everything. The Jesus that I worship, and the Jesus who you all should be worshiping, is a man who we should all strive to become because he is the Son of the living God. Jesus was a man who didn't casually judge people, who stood up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. Pardon me, I actually should have said Jesus was a man who did not casually judge people, excuse me there, just to clarify, okay? Who stood up, he was a man who stood up for those who could not stand up for themselves, and he is a man who never felt slighted or who never felt that his life was unfair. Jesus was wary of people who spoke of God on their lips, who lacked true faith in their hearts. He was a man who embraced everyone, even those who disagreed with him. A man who personified everything mankind should be. As for those conservatives, who knows what man they worship? If the policies that they support, if their policies are reflective of the faith they follow, it sure isn't Christianity, and that man that they follow is surely not Jesus. And for now, I think that's all that needs to be said about that. This is Reverend Paul J. Bern with Progressive Christian Ministries, coming to you from Atlanta, Georgia, saying many thanks for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day or your evening. And don't forget to visit my website at www.pcmatl.org. Visit my book page. A lot of good stuff there. Books by Reverend Paul. That's me. That's all for now. Many thanks to all, and be blessed in Jesus' mighty name.